Good morning and welcome to Scotland Speaks, back here in the studio on Saturday morning at 10 a.m. First of all, with apologies that we couldn't bring you a show last week. That of course was down to the storm that rendered most of our guests unable to travel to us, and indeed it wasn't safe to do so. And of course, bearing in mind the safety of our production crew, we simply couldn't put on a show, but instead played out at Burns Night of 2024, which I'll come back to in a moment. Now, before last week's show was due to air, we'd had on the previous week the Fannings. And of course, the Fannings are currently in a case in the Court of Session against both UK and Scottish governments relative to the winter fuel payment. Let's take a look at what they had to say in that show. TV. Peter, how have you enjoyed being thrust into the limelight?
I think I've got to be honest about it and say that we spoke to Alex before that meeting in Edinburgh. And he told us exactly what was going to happen and practically predicted the questions that was going to come. And he sat beside me and says, look, see, if I want you not to answer a question, I'll just nudge your toe. so we had that whole thing. But I've got to say the press on that day kind of changed my opinion of the press, because I've always thought, when I've saw some of the interviews that's happened, that there's a kind of, this is what we want to hear, so this is what we're pressing you on. I actually believe that the press was on our side. I think there was a lot of people there that thought, you know, this is unjust.
And here's what you had to say about the Fannings. Catherine says, I take my hat off to this lovely couple for their brave efforts and their love of humanity. More power to their elbow. Thank you, Taz, for a great show. Well, thank you, Catherine. Anne Collins gives me some lovely compliments, which I won't read out, but she does say, Alex will be an even greater man now, because I think many more will have come to know him through all the testimonies. He'll always be missed but never forgotten. I hope one day in the not too distant future, his dream and our dream will be realised. Please don't rush to change the title, because many times Alex continues to speak, albeit through others, but it is his words and advice being used. Happy New Year. Thank you, Anne, for such a lovely message. Eleanor says, Happy New Year. It'll be a strange one without Alex, but he'll never be forgotten, always in our hearts and thoughts. Pam gives me another lovely compliment, but she does also say, independence, independence, we must come together. SN for RFF says, always enjoy these shows, thanks. Kizzy says, what an absolutely fabulous programme. These two pensioners are doing such a lot of great work for the pensioners of Scotland. It's very disappointing that John Swinney's SNP government is not supporting you. Lots of money given to foreign countries, which is okay if we can afford it, but Scotland cannot. It's a matter of choice, and Swinney doesn't support Scotland's pensioners. Such a disappointment. Mohab Masood says, thank you so much, Tasmina, for continuing the show. Really glad to see you again on YouTube. Thank you, Mohab. And James Fennessy says, brilliant programme as always. Well, thank you to James. Now, last week, because we were unable to bring you a new show about the Trump inauguration, we played out the Albert Party Burn Supper from 2024, which included the wonderful Alex giving his version of the Reverend I Am Jolly. Here's a look back at some excerpts from last week's show.
Now, I've been asked where's my kilt. Now, the Clan MacNeil motto was conquer or die. And we've ended up in the island of Barra, which I presume we did a lot more dying than we ever did conquering. And the clan ended up quite poor, so we can't afford a kilt. But we got a kilt between us, and we divided it, we made ties. So hence no kilt, or else it's lost in a Calmac ferry that's gone via Ullapool rather than Oban. Another disclaimer here, by the way, is I'm available for the SNP as well for burn suppers, but... But given they wouldn't have me and Mr. Chris McElhenney for about 5 years before they expelled me, I'm not really waiting by the phone for the call.
But at least today's specimen knows what a woman is. Although Angus is a believer in biology, he didn't have to be. In his case, it was practice that made him perfect. Indeed, he's had so much practice, it's made him perfect in identifying real women from pretendy ones, and in most cases, but not all, before it's too late. Just a wee reminder while we're here, ladies and gentlemen, if you have to self-ID as a woman, it's because you're not one in the first place. Now, Angus,
in order to beat the cold, I have embraced the new technology of WhatsApp. to deliver my sermons, Burns nicht addresses, and family communications. This has not worked out as well as I'd hoped, and is fraught with danger when the wrong buttons are pressed. As a result, Ephesia did not appreciate my harmless flirting with the Women's Guild. The loyal Sons of Orange Perth City chapter expected rather more from my immortal memory than a Tesco message line with an instruction to have my tea on the table. While the Women's Guild itself took exception to being told to be up to their knees in Fenian blood. As a result, I have deleted all WhatsApp messages in line with the recent Kirk instruction, and just to be safe, backdated it to 2007, 6 years before WhatsApp was introduced.
And one final tweet for today from last week's show comes from Susan, who says, "Thank you, Tasmina, for this wonderful tribute to the great bard, Alex, the Albo Party and its great friends and allies. This team, I believe, will soon lead Scotland to freedom and independence. Keep up the great work with love and gratitude." Thank you so much, Susan. And now to this week's show, the Trump inauguration, which was quite a spectacle. Coming up after the break, we'll be speaking to Daniel Jack, who is a former Scottish Government councillor in the United States of America between 2013 and 2016. And we'll also be speaking to Marjorie Thompson. She's an American, but former chair of UKCND and also the Director of Communications for the Commission of Racial Equality. We'll see you all after the break. Welcome back to Scotland Speaks, and I'm delighted to be joined in the studio by Marjorie Thompson, former chair of UKCND and former Comms Director for the Commission for Racial Equality, and Daniel Jack, former Scottish Government councillor in the United States between 13 and 16. Welcome both to Scotland Speaks. Now, I know, Daniel, you've been in the studio before because you had the privilege of being interviewed by Alex himself, and I thought we would start today's discussion by speaking about Alex and asking you to share some of your stories and memories of Alex. And Marjorie, I'm going to come to you first because you are an American, brought up California, came to the UK in the 70s and into Scotland in the 80s, but met Alex many years ago.
Yeah, it was about 40 years ago actually, because I was 27 and he was 29. And we met because my ex-partner, David Ellis-Thomas, was the leader of Plaid Cymru. And Alex, always thinking 6 steps ahead of the game, said, how can we get more publicity for Plaid Cymru in the SNP? Because I think the SNP probably only had about 4 MPs in Parliament then, and Plaid had 2. So they met up, and then they had David and Gordon Wilson send Valentines to each other. That was the sort of PR hook, and pre-social media, It sounds really naff, but it did get coverage in all the Welsh and Scottish press, and that's what we wanted. And then they began to share resources at Westminster, the Whip's office, combining in order to get a full day opposition debate rather than just a half day each. And of course, 2 years after that, Alex was elected to Parliament for the first time to Westminster, and would see him just regularly on a social basis. At one stage, he and Davith did share an office because they were the two radicals really in their parties. And then I remember going up to Bannockburn and marching behind the Saltire and some bagpipes with Gordon and Edith Wilson at the front. And I was there with Davith and Alex, and he was sort of muttering under his breath about, all this performative stuff. And he still had and maintained, obviously, a radical vision for an independent Scotland, and he kind of thought that was all a bit naff, to be honest.
So you knew Alex for a very long time indeed, and of course came up to Scotland in the 80s and then eventually joined the Alba Party. What drew you to Alba? Was it that long-term understanding and relationship with Alex?
Well, I always said when I was down in London that if I lived in Scotland, I would be in the SNP. And clearly, the SNP had changed by the time I moved up here. When I was first here, when I was married in '82, well before I knew Alex, I had been an administrator for Boston University at the Holy Loch. So that's what got me into CND. And, I knew that under Alex, the SNP had never wavered from its commitment to nuclear disarmament. By the time I actually moved up here and retired, Alba was in existence. The SNP was backpedaling on its anti-nuclear commitment. And having met him and you and some other Alba people, I was thinking, actually, now finally here's a party I can wholly agree with. And I also remember raising the issue when I first met you, saying, look, I really feel strongly about the gender issue. I don't want men changing clothes in a locker room with my niece who's on the swim team. And you said, no problem, that's where we are. So yeah, it was a perfect fit, and it was great to be welcomed back with open arms by him.
Daniel, you spent some time with Alex working in the Scottish Government, so let's hear a bit about that. Some of your experiences with Alex, special memories.
Yes, I mean, I worked with him in a number of different guises, but there were a number of experiences whereby you saw a unique side of him. And Storm Eowyn, which we've just all endured, sort of prompted my memories of the last great storm, which was in early December 2010. I don't know if you recall, there was something like 500 people were stuck in their cars. There'd been this sudden dump of snow, completely unexpected. And people were trapped in their cars going home from work. It was quite a very serious situation, one which we'd never endured before. And Alex activated the Scottish Government's resilience room. And I was a team leader in the resilience room at the time. And I remember quite clearly, we were sitting there, and it was a time when there was a number of chief constables, not just the one. And so they were all producing their sit-reps, their situation reports as to what was happening. And Alex was listening quietly. And I remember distinctly one chief constable saying, oh, there are 50 cars trapped in this part of the motorway that I'm responsible for. And Alex just said, right, and so how are the people in the cars? And he said, I don't know, First Minister. And he just was very quiet. He said, so you know the number of cars, but you don't know about the people in them. Don't you think you should know that? Don't you think you should know if they're warm enough, if they have anything to drink? Things like that. As Marjorie said, he would think 2 steps ahead of everybody else. And it was quite a unique insight to see how his mind worked in a very fast-moving situation like that, where other people would say, well, let's take stock, let's scenario plan, let's think of what we do. He was way ahead of the game. And he said, right, this is what I want you to do. And he would identify the solution, and he would get the solution delivered. It was quite a masterclass in leadership, and quite an eye-opener for me, because I never had that exposure to him firsthand up until that point. And it was really masterful in terms of how he achieved the results that he did. And it's a side that, I think that we get a bit blasé about political leaders. We all think they're on a pedestal. They're not all there, actually. Some are quite mediocre, but he was way above the rest in terms of his strategic planning and thinking and delivering, which is what people expect of their politicians.
Now, when Alex was First Minister, that was a time when you were in Washington, D.C. as a Scottish
Yes.
Government councillor, and even more specifically around the time of the independence referendum.
Yes.
First of all, please describe what the role of a Scottish Government councillor is in Washington and what your interaction is around about that time.
Well, my role was to represent the Scottish Government in the Americas, and that covered the whole gamut of Scottish Government policy. My office was embedded within the British Embassy because we were accredited diplomats by the State Department, but we had to be resident in the embassy. So there was a tricky relationship there in terms of I didn't answer to the ambassador or the UK government. I answered to the First Minister and the Scottish government, but yet we were guests, if you like, of the UK government. But we paid handsomely for the privilege of being there. And so my role was not at odds with the UK government, but to give the line as to why we thought, the government thought independence was the right move for Scotland. And I remember when, in the build-up to the referendum, we entered a period of purdah where we weren't allowed to say things to different people. And I had planned to give a talk to my church group because they were fascinated by Scotland and Scottish independence. And I was told in no uncertain terms I had to cancel that talk. I couldn't speak to anybody about independence. And yet at the same time, the British ambassador was on the media every opportunity saying how awful it would be if my country was broken up. I thought, this is just not on. So I was approached by the Diane Ream show. I don't know if you know of her. She's a very famous broadcaster on public broadcasting radio. And I accepted the invitation to go and speak about Scottish independence and didn't tell my UK counterparts. So I went along and I was up against Jim Naughtie. Jim Naughtie was in the studio in Glasgow and I was in the studio in Washington. And we had a really good discussion, sparring and all the rest of it. But I remember in the break, I said to the producer, "Oh, I'm really enjoying this, but how many people actually listen to this?" And she said, on average, 12.5 million. I thought, that's more than double the population of Scotland are getting to hear about Scottish independence and the case for independence. The UK government representatives in the embassy were absolutely livid when I went back because I'd pulled a fast one, and they didn't really forgive me for that. But I thought, well, what's good enough for the ambassador is good enough for me, actually.
And did Alex get to hear about this particular instance?
Yes. I think Alex was very proud of what we'd achieved.
I'm sure.
And the other thing that happened was, in the build-up, there was a bill presented in the House of Representatives which said that independent Scotland would be the worst thing ever since sliced bread. And Alex was really annoyed at that these members of Congress had tabled a bill specifically about what was our constitutional position.
Was it just like a House joint resolution, like an early day motion stating something? It had no chance of becoming US policy.
But it was a bill, yes. So I received this phone call late at night saying...
From Mr. Salmond.
From Mr. Salmond's office saying, the First Minister wants another bill presented to the House. One saying that independence would be a great thing. I thought, oh my goodness, what are we going to do now? I, of course, had never been involved in American legislation. So we worked through the night and we drafted a bill, and I sent it to a friendly congressman. He scrutinised it, he didn't change it at all, and he tabled it. And so the bill was presented the next day. So one cancelled the other. You're right, because nothing was going to happen.
They're symbolic.
Exactly.
But it's a way of making a statement, and
so
yet you do need to push back against something like that.
And so we had a very happy First Minister as a result of that.
And Margie, the engagement with the US, or the invited engagement by the UK government around the time of referendum, must have caused yourself as a Scottish nationalist some angst, attempts to at least entice them to interfere in the debate?
To be completely honest, I was thinking about that, but I was also thinking about visiting Alex with a friend from Glasgow. I'd come up from London, and we went to his office when he was First Minister, and he was regaling us with stories about how when he'd gone to Glasgow airport after the bombing there, Jackie Smith had called him and said, "Alex, don't go near that airport." And he said, "I'm already there, Jackie. I have to remind you it's under my jurisdiction." And also how Gordon Brown hadn't spoken to him on the phone for the first year. And he just kept, merrily telling us stories, and the staff would look around, and I kept trying to leave because I thought he's so important. We should leave. We've had our 20 minutes. Anyway, we then had a picture in front of a Jack Vettriano painting. He said, "I'm sure it was done of George Square during a CND rally." And that Christmas, the card that he sent, the donations for the Christmas cards were sent to the Muslim Association of Scotland. And I thought that is the consummate recognition by a politician that certain communities might be tarred with the same brush of people who had laid that explosive device at Glasgow Airport, to show them, as he said to me when I first came up, every new Scot gets a welcome from the former First Minister, to show them that they were included in Scotland. And I thought that was incredibly impressive. The referendum, this is a terrible thing to say, I guess, but I'm happy about sharing it. I had been clinically depressed that summer because of bereavement, and the only thing that kept me going, and it's pathetic, isn't it? The only thing that kept me going was watching Alex on television, and it looked like it really was going to happen. And I think maybe there was some rugby as well starting in September. So those were the two things that I was most interested in following. Independence first, but rugby second, and nothing else. I was just very in a place of my own. And I also remember having driven with my dog to an inn in somewhere outside of Reading, one of those beautiful little places where The Wind in the Willows was written. And, she was on her last legs, but I remember turning on the television in the morning and seeing Alex on the screen. So, for me, I associate him with the big causes in my life and some of the big moments in my life. And I'm hugely grateful to him for, welcoming me and meeting all the people in Alba.
You mentioned earlier about the international aspect of Alex, and I think we tend to overlook that, not deliberately, because he's such a big personality, played such a pivotal life in domestic politics, but internationally his reach was quite astounding. And one of the most bizarre things that happened to me was that a Scottish government minister was going on an official visit to Chile. And so I had to go to Santiago to do the recce, to finalise the programme and make all the arrangements. And we'd spent a whole day meetings with various government departments and other organisations. And I was there with my assistant, and she could speak fluent Spanish, so she was there as an interpreter. And so we went into the main park in Santiago, which is massive. And we're sitting there having a sandwich when the park attendant comes up with a clipboard. And my assistant said, he's asking us, he has to record where everybody is from for his statistics. And so, okay, she said, I'm from Washington, D.C. And I said, I'm from Scotland. And he put down his pen, he said, Scotland, Alex Salmond, independence, yes. And I was completely blown away. Here was a man, a manual worker in a park, public park, thousands of miles from home, had heard about Alex. And so I said to my assistant, how on earth does he know about the First Minister? And how does he know about independence? And it turns out that one of his duties was to tidy up the park after the morning rush. You get businessmen and others going in, reading the business papers, having their coffee before they headed into the office. He would tidy up all the newspapers, and in his break, he would collect the newspapers and he would scan them and he would read them. And he'd read about Alex and Scottish independence from one of these newspapers. And he'd remembered it. He'd made the link between Alex and Scotland and independence.
Well, I was going to say those 4 words that you said, Scotland, Alex Salmond, independence, and yes, beautifully and succinctly put the case for Scottish independence, and how Scotland is synonymous with Alex, which is synonymous with independence, and of course, yes. Now, we're going to move on to discussing the state of US politics and the relationship with Scotland after the break. We'll see you then.
Water is life, but not all water is equal. Our water ionizer restructures and alkalizes water for optimum hydration and detoxification, recreating the planet's ultimate water sources, found in lightning-struck lakes and newly melted icebergs. H2 Pure Source. Change your water. Change your life.
Welcome back to Scotland Speaks. I'm joined by Daniel Jack and Marjorie Thompson as we speak about the inauguration of President Trump and what it means for relations between the US and Scotland. But first of all, let's talk about the inauguration ceremony itself. Regardless of what anybody might view about the President Trump himself, the ceremony gave us, and the events surrounding it, gave us lots to talk about. There was J.D. Vance and his sort of children climbing all over the place, his daughter with all the plasters around her fingers, various different things that happened that are real things. The great interest in the fashion of the First Lady and the you call it the Second Lady, don't you, Marjorie, the wife of the Vice President?
It's not that much in use, but I guess technically that's who they are. I know Kamala Harris's husband was the second gentleman when she was vice president. So,
and then of course the fact that President Trump seemed to forgotten to put his hand on the Bibles. So Margie, what did you as a now Scot, American Scot, let's call you, but wearing your American hat, what was your view about the whole inauguration itself?
I thought it was kind of tacky. Having been myself to Ronald Reagan's inaugural ball, the prime ball, the one for Californians, which was held at the Kennedy Center. And that's always the most important one, the state where the person comes from. And I read that people who'd shown up for a particular dinner during all the inauguration festivities, I think they'd paid $250,000 for a table. They were left out queuing in the cold. The food was terrible. You know, it's basically what I would expect of Trump and his family. You know, there's a nouveau riche sheen to them, but underneath it's just quite a lot of money grubbing, and things are not done well or elegantly, however well Melania Trump might dress.
And did it surprise you to see the sort of second row behind the family being full of the tech giants as opposed to cabinet members?
Well, Trump is a transactional person. He's only interested in money. He might say he wants to make America great again, but I doubt he really knows much American history. And I think these guys impress him because of their wealth, and he impresses them because of his power. So it's wholly transactional. And I think someone pointed out recently that you know, we've given a lot of government grants and subsidies to people in Silicon Valley, yet the Chinese government has been able to go much further in AI and other aspects of tech development than the United States have. So that's the reality. It might not be what we're told on the mainstream media.
And Daniel, your views on the inauguration and indeed the event afterwards, because it was held indoors, you couldn't have the parade inside, where we had a symbolic Trump desk and all of these executive orders for him to sign. What was your view of the whole thing?
I'm going to disagree with Marjorie, with all due respect.
Good.
Because I don't think it was tacky, actually. I think that what we are seeing is Trump version 2.0, which is completely different from the first version. I think people tend not to appreciate what he has achieved. You know, we think, well, it's his second term, but he's only the second person to ever have achieved that. The last person to do this, I have a non-consecutive second term, you'll know this better than me, Marjorie, was Grover Cleveland in 1893.
And no one's ever heard of him.
Exactly. So 132 years ago since someone has achieved what Donald Trump has achieved. And that, I think, indicates what's going to happen during the second presidency. He's had 4 years to think about it. Now, I think we all think the first one was a bit chaotic. And he had all these grandiose ideas, but he had no way of knowing how to implement them. I think he's thought long and hard about that. And I think that is partly why you had this symbolic signing of executive orders before he'd even entered the White House. It was, this is a new Trump. This is the one who's going to get things done. And it's all about his legacy, I think, this time.
Well, I say good because I like to sort of generate discussion. I anticipate there would be differing opinions about President Trump, but I suppose you could look at it, you know, is it a different Trump? Is this going to be a 4 years of exacting revenge upon those who he thinks he should exact revenge upon? And some of the imagery that we've seen that you'd mentioned has been quite deliberate. Certainly the media, the US media, has liked to take us in that direction of seeing, you know, Melania's pictures as her first ones that have emanated just this week as First Lady in a sort of more power, more dynamic pose than the previous, sort of softer image to the more, you know, we mean business this time. I find that quite interesting. But is it really going to be different, Daniel? Because I take you to the point when he went to the Oval Office after all of these ceremonies on the day, sitting in the Oval Office with all of these executive orders, all of the world's press there. And he had somebody prompting him about what the next executive order was about. And it was like something out of reality television. Sort of an open discussion with the press. And actually a member of the press said to him, oh, did Joe Biden leave you a letter? And he said, I don't know if you watched it. Oh, I haven't checked. Maybe he has. Opens the drawer and then Bob's your uncle, there it is. And you wonder if he hadn't been prompted, would he have known that day that it was there? Do you really think it's going to be that different from just looking at some of these antics, let's put it that way?
Yes, I think it's going to be different, and I actually think it's going to be more dangerous because he had grandiose ideas and schemes in the first presidency, and he really didn't know how to execute them, how to put them into effect. There was an enormous degree of chaos at the start of the last presidency. He's had 4 years to reflect on that, 4 years to reflect on how to get things done. But you're right. I mean, there is still the element of the showman about him, and you'll never eliminate that. He's a master at that. But I think that in terms of getting things done which he has promised the electorate to do, he will make a better fist of it this time.
Now, Marjorie, we touched upon in the first half the invitations there were to Obama at the time to intervene or say something about the Scottish referendum. Do you think the people of America would have welcomed John Swinney and Keir Starmer, both as First Minister and Prime Minister, coming out in advance and supporting Kamala Harris?
No, just like Polly Toynbee telling Guardian readers years ago to put clothespins on their noses and advocate writing to people in America to vote for Hillary Clinton. They see us as we are, a small island off the coast of Europe, which purportedly we have a special relationship with. But, although people don't seem to mind the United States telling other countries how to run their affairs, they would mind anybody in Britain telling them how to run theirs. And I have to completely disagree with Daniel about getting things done. Yeah, he has different personnel. Last time he had H.R. McMaster, who is a military guy, as his chief of staff. Now, funnily enough, he has somebody from the second Reagan administration, a woman, who will be the John Sears of his government. John Sears was the eminence grise behind Ronald Reagan. And so they've got all these executive orders ready, but I ask you to look at what he has done. He's recently fired all the Justice Department attorneys that were working under Jack Smith's investigation of him. That's carte blanche, and I doubt if they have a trade union to protect them. Certainly if a British Prime Minister tried to do that to top civil servants, that would impede them. The sucker punch for me a few days ago was reading that he, by executive order, has rescinded part of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Now, the Civil Rights Act, for anybody that ever was a patriotic American, is key. It's crucial. It's Lyndon Johnson, with his consummate mastery of how you work politics on the Hill, getting that act through, which gave equal rights to people like you and me and African Americans, women, black people, other people of color, in terms of employment. And he has rescinded that in one fell swoop of the pen. This is dangerous. This is dictatorship. And I blame Mary McLeod of Stornoway, because she never taught that guy the word no, and she never taught him how to share with others. He is an out-of-control egomaniac. And I'm with Colombia, Mexico, Greenland, Denmark, and Canada, who've all stood up to him and said no.
Margie, when it was unpopular to do so, when Trump was first president in the House of Commons, had a debate in Westminster Hall about whether he should be invited to address Parliament Hall. And at that time, I had lots of people, the people now who are against him were saying, well, you can't criticise him because it's the office you have to respect. Which brings me to the point I was going to make to you, Daniel. We don't have to like the individual, which clearly you don't, Margie, but we also have to respect the fact that he is President of the United States and we need to have a relationship.
I was thinking about that in the run-up to this interview, and I wondered if that was the source of your great friendship with John Bercow. Because John Bercow, who's paid the price of being the only speaker never to be elevated to the Lords, even though those inadequate people like Michael Martin and Viscount Tanapandy were elevated, I'm sure that's a price that he paid. But by standing up against letting Trump speak to the joint houses of Parliament, I felt very proud that day.
Daniel?
Yeah, I'm not an apologist for Trump and his beliefs and his actions, because I agree with Marjorie in terms of some of the things he's done by executive order are really questionable. But what I'm saying is the fact that he is able to do them and he's done them so quickly demonstrates that he is on an agenda and that he will succeed in that agenda because he's far more focused and far more organised than he was in the first term. I'm not saying it's a good thing. In fact, I think it's more dangerous. But I think he's got his act together.
Now, you recently wrote in The National, Daniel, about your view about how Scotland can carve her own relationship with the United States. You know, I know, Margie, like me, you're very clear that an independent Scotland's foreign policy initiatives would be vastly different from the UK, who are currently representing us, although we don't want that to be the case on the world stage. You mentioned, Daniel, in your article how you thought there was an opportunity even now within the current framework for Scotland to carve our own arrangement or understanding.
Yes, because I think this is the opportune time, Tasmina, to, at the beginning of a new presidency, a new administration, for us to make our voice heard. We have a diplomatic presence in Washington. Okay, it's embedded within the UK diplomatic presence.
And it's Peter Mandelson.
Yes, but there is an opportunity there for us. When I was there, I had direct links with officials in the State Department. And as we grew nearer to the independence referendum, those links became even stronger because they were worried about what was going to happen to Holyloch. So there are opportunities there, I think. And what I would say is I would encourage whoever is there in that post at the moment to start making those overtures, to start reaching out to State Department and other government departments where they can make a difference in terms of how we're perceived. That's not to say we should try and engage directly with the president, because that's never going to happen, I don't think. But that broader engagement with the administration, I think, is essential.
Mark, and I think we would all see the benefit in that. We're all hoping within this term, President Trump's term, we are going to be having the opportunity to vote for independence for Scotland, at least in this period of time. And therefore, Marge, I'm sure you would agree that developing a relationship, even at that level with other people involved in the administration, could be helpful for us with a view to the future.
Oh, sure. You can always have, the usual channels, like the two front benches talking to each other behind the Speaker's chair in the Commons. But look, the guy is a bully. There were deportation flights of Colombians going to Colombia from America under the Biden administration. In fact, there were over 400 flights. The difference is that Trump is using the military to deport people, and he's tying them up, like they're animals, and that's why the president of Colombia refused them. He said, if you're deporting people, you deport them with dignity. So he backed down on that one. And I think it's true. If you stand up against a bully, they will back down. A lot of the stuff is soundbite politics. And I think if I were the leader of a Scottish political party, which thank God I'm not, but you're the chair of one, we could issue a list of demands. And let's go back to Holyloch. It's great that Holyloch is closed. We had no input into that. It was that the United States decided it didn't need it anymore. It didn't need forward basing of Trident submarines because we've now got our own stock, supposedly, at Faslane and Coalport. But let's ask the United States to clean up the lock at Holyloch. It was there between the early 60s and the mid 2010s to 2020s. And it's full of radioactive particles. And why was it allowed to be placed there when in the United States you cannot have something that dangerous within a certain radius of a huge population center? Can't do it down in Portsmouth or Plymouth either, but it's okay to put it in Scotland. I think Scotland says no to that, and Scotland says no to Donald Trump. But obviously, Daniel, the diplomacy has to go on behind the scenes. You are a diplomat. I'm sure you were a consummate diplomat. I, on the other hand, am, as I said once to Alex, my understanding of a pressure group is that you stand outside and the politicians do what they can, but as a pressure group, you set the parameters. You put the dream of the whole thing. And he said, yes, I agree with that.
There are basically two elements to effective diplomacy. And one is information sharing and exchanging information. And the other is building relationships. And the fact is, you have to build relationships with people who you personally may not find very attractive. But it's part of the role. You have to get into their mindset. You have to understand where they're coming from. I agree with you that Trump comes across as a bully. But where are we? Almost 2 weeks into his presidency, and already he has achieved significant results. The president of Colombia backed down, and the deportation flights will now continue. His threat to take over Greenland, which is bizarre by anyone's reckoning, nevertheless has had effect. Denmark suddenly has found billions of euros to increase Arctic security. So he's achieving what he wants to achieve by being a bully. And I think that's what he's done all his
The president of Colombia didn't back down. The president of Colombia said, I will take people, as I took them from the Biden administration, on commercial flights. What I will not take is Colombians being manacled like convicts and put on U.S. military flights, which costs more money. I know about building relationships with the opposition. George Robertson, who was General Secretary of NATO, was one of the two people supporting me, along with Deputy Speaker Rosie Winterton, when I applied for my British citizenship in 2006. I worked with George. I worked with Donald Dewar. I worked with some Tories. Some of them chased me out of their offices. But I know how to work with the opposition. I just believe that he personally is a bloated egomaniac. Let him do stuff with the royal family. That's what he wants. He brags about it. He says, oh, we're personal friends. Look, here's a picture. He is...
Yet, of course, the people of America did vote for him, and he would say voted for him in their droves, and the biggest vote ever in all history, or however he gesticulates and gives all these figures. So that is something that we're going to have to respect, something we're going to have to work with, either as part of the United Kingdom or hopefully as an independent Scotland, and develop our own relationship.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, Tasmina. Over 77 million people voted for him, so it's not an insignificant number. And even taking into account, and I'm not disparaging what Marjorie says about him as a character, the fact is he is the President of the United States of America, and that is a special position, and we have to work with that. And my argument is, leaving aside his character and his flaws, because everybody has flaws, maybe he's got more than others, there is an opportunity there, an opportunity to build a strong and lasting relationship. And I think now is the time to start building that relationship.
Well, we're not going to agree on President Trump, but that is for sure. And he'll be the subject, as he would be delighted to know,
yes,
of many discussions on many programmes in many households for as long as possible. I remember the Westminster Hall debate that I had was about banning Trump, because he wanted to ban Muslims from entering the United States of America, which of course included myself and my family. So we all have strong opinions, and people said, oh, but you have to respect the office, which I understand, and I understand diplomacy. And there are many world leaders now having to engage with the President of
yes,
the United States of America, despite what they might have said in the
absolutely,
past. But we are united on Scottish independence. And I'd like to thank you both for joining me today in the studio and speaking about Alex and Scottish independence, and of course the inauguration of President Trump. Thank you both.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so
Marjorie
much.
and Daniel.
Thank you.
Now, coming up next week, we're going to turn to Alex Salmond, as we will in every show, and the memorial event that we held for ALBA party members in Linlithgow last week. Over the next 2 weeks, you'll be able to see some speeches and contributions from members and their thoughts and memories about Alex. A very touching event that it was, and you can look forward to watching that. But for now, thank you so much for joining me and Marjorie and Daniel on Scotland Speaks, and we hope to see you all again next week. Until then, stay safe. Bye-bye for now.